Welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show. As always, I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. Today's conversation, we dig into the story behind Uncharted Moments, a journey shaped by uncertainty, reinvention, and the experiences that forced us to lead without a map. We talk about the moments that tested him, the lessons he drew from the Lewis and Clark expedition, and those that are unplanned, unexpected chapters in his life that reshaped his understanding of resilience, trust, and leadership. This isn't a book about a trail. It's a book about the inner terrain we must all navigate for life and leadership. Please join me in welcoming an old dear friend, Jeff Tunn. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Peggy. It is so great to sit down and chat with you, and looking forward to the conversation.
It's so funny, Jeff, when you and I got together here and you were saying, this isn't like a normal technology book, but I was so thrilled to have you on the show because it's fun that we've been in technology for so long, that we've been and we get a chance to write something about a journey that we've learned from those things, those experiences. And so I thought even before we get into this book, maybe it would be helpful for our listeners for you to set the stage for the background of maybe you and a little bit that helped you get to the point that drew you to write this book.
Okay. All right. So I am a career technologist, as you hinted at. In fact, that's how you and I crossed paths, a few years ago at this point.
Just say a few years.
Right?
We'll stick with that. That's right.
Yeah. So I spent 45 years in technology, and most of that, probably the second half, a little more than half, were in leadership positions everywhere from manager, director, all the way up to chief information officer for a couple of organizations. And then I joke and say I went to the dark side and I joined a vendor company as their executive for product. And the story that's in this book has evolved. It's actually a story of my wife and I tracing the Lewis and Clark Trail 20 years ago. And it's a book that I always wanted to write, but I didn't have the storyline for it. And as life unfolded here in the last several years, I realized that the story was twofold. The story was our story, the story of my wife and I and our relationship. But in looking back at some of the things that happened during that time, it really set the foundation for my leadership career. Some of the lessons that I learned, and I know we'll talk about this shortly, but how to navigate without a map. Because as leaders, we oftentimes find ourselves without a map that we have to follow.
Life is without a map today. If we think about it, we all have Google, no pun intended, but it is. Life is a journey. Yes. And we think about that. We don't really know and we can't control it. Some of it's out of our hands, and I think all of it's really out of our hands. But I love the idea that you call this the uncharted moments. And I want you to really explain for those listening, what does that really mean? And why do they matter for leaders today? And I really am. The reason I'm going to emphasize this is we're thinking about AI and we have to lead now. And the person that we are as leaders right now is changing dramatically than what it was 20 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think that's evolved for me as well. Originally, when I got the idea for Uncharted Moments, it was related to the unexplained, the serendipitous moments that happened as we were on these travels. And that fills up, those are still in the book. But I think one of the major leadership lessons that really struck me about Lewis and Clark was that they took a map with them. And that surprised me. I thought they were the ones that drew the map. And they were, but they took a map, but everything west of St. Louis was labeled with one word, conjectural. They had no idea what was out there, yet they decided to go anyway. And I think that's one of the leadership lessons for Uncharted Moments for leaders today is we don't know what's around that next bend, and we have to have the courage, the element of risk taking, to go forward anyway, to step into that unknown and explore, learn what we can, learn from others around us, gather information, and keep putting one step in front of the other.
I really wish your wife was on this podcast right now so she could say, does she agree with everything you're saying? Or she's, well, we went and explored, but boy, I wish we didn't explore, because it's kind of fun, because sometimes as spouses, we have difference of opinion, but you use Lewis and Clark as this metaphor throughout the
Yes.
book. And it's an interesting thing is, how do leaders navigate this uncertainty then? It's one thing to be spouses to say it, but how do
Yeah.
you do it as leaders in this business world?
I think using Lewis and Clark as an example, they gathered as much information as they could. They had many conversations, and you and I've had conversations in the past, Peggy, about the power of our professional network and leveraging your network for information and guidance, not the answers, right? Your network's not going to give you the answers. They're going to give you input so that you can make that decision. And I think Lewis and Clark modeled that so very well as they were on their journeys. And I think that's number one, is preparation, being gathered. You don't want analysis paralysis, right? You don't want to have that old cliche, but you want to gather the information that is at hand as much as you can. You want to talk to your network. You want to listen to podcasts, listen to experts, and then plot your course. I think you have to have trust in yourself, trust in your team, and your team has to have trust in each other and trust in you to go into these unknown places. Sometimes it takes an innovative approach. You might have to think of different ways of approaching the same problem, new ways of approaching the problems that you've approached in the past, because some things need a new way forward, a new way to look at the problem. And then a word that Lewis and Clark wouldn't have used would be agility. You have to be agile. They probably would have used adaptability back in that day. But I think those are the elements that we can learn from them about taking that step into the unknown.
It's interesting to hear you talk like this, because sometimes when we talk about how do we take a journey or how do we do things, we have a plan. How do we look at the strategy? But sometimes that plan doesn't fit our reality. As we look today, things are shifting so fast, the speed of change. Yeah. How do you actually, organizations spend a lot of money trying to figure it out, and sometimes they're just throwing money right into the fireplace. Yeah. How do you adjust for that? How do you plan for that reality that's occurring right around you?
And I think that is such a great question, because we always rely on our roadmap. We rely on our plan. And then what's the old joke? You do an annual plan, and by February, you throw it out the window because reality is different. I think one of the things, and I'll throw a Lewis and Clark story in here. They've already traversed the country. They're out on the West Coast and they're heading back. They're going back through the mountains, and they come to the Nez Perce village that they had stayed at the prior fall. And the Nez Perce tell them, oh no, you can't cross the mountains. It's too early. The snow hasn't melted yet. And they're like, oh no, we're the core of discovery, right? We're going to go ahead. And they get a little bit further down the path and they find out that the chiefs might have been right. The snow was way too deep. They were taking too much risk. So they backed up, they retreated, they went back to the Nez Perce and adjusted their plans because of the circumstances around them. And I think we can learn from that through today's leadership, as maybe the overall vision doesn't change, but the strategies may have to be adapted for the current reality. Using the pandemic a few years ago as an example, everybody had to change their strategies going through that. And when you think about it, everybody looks back on that and say, oh, that was such an unusual time. We didn't know what was going on. We never know what's going on. We never know what's around the corner. And so you have to be ready with different scenarios. Hey, if this happens, then we're going to do this. If this happens, then we're going to do this. But you have to be willing to step back and say, okay, this isn't working. Let's try a different approach. Let's rethink it and then move forward.
Do you believe you were like that as a CIO, that you didn't have all the answers? You had to step back when you didn't have all the answers?
I had a great team.
Oh,
Peggy.
now I'm putting you on the spot there for that one right now.
I think that's one of the hardest things. And it seems like, especially in technology, we get promoted into leadership roles because we're experts at technology, right? I became a manager, a director, because I was really good at COBOL, not because I was good at leading people. And so one of the hardest transitions is when you're no longer that expert in the room, is where do you get your information? You get it from your team, you get it from your network, you get it from outside experts. And that's part of that navigation process of
So if I,
when you
not
aren't
to
the
interrupt,
smartest
but you're
person.
just saying is sometimes it's not the best to be the smartest person in the room. You might know the technology, but you need other people who have the insight, because
Yes.
sometimes you don't know everything, but you need to collect that wisdom in the room. And that's sometimes I think leaders fail to understand that. And that's what you're describing.
Yes, absolutely. And everybody gets a voice, right? You want everybody to provide you information. It may not be a decision that you're trying to reach consensus on. It may be a decision that you're going to make. You've got that C title after your name for a reason, but you want to have the information at hand, and the information, especially from the people that are closest to it.
So you can't travel these unnavigated roads without trusting someone else who's been there. So that's
Exactly.
what you're saying, like Lewis and
Yeah.
Clark. Sometimes they had to trust the chiefs who knew better than they. And that's the same experience here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They gathered information multiple times along the route from people who had been there and done there and seen that. Now, not all the information was 100% accurate or 100% complete, but it was better than going with no information.
So if we were to look at all these things that you writing this book and the experience, if listeners are facing their own uncharted moment, and I think we all are at this time, I think AI is making us all feel a little uneasy at the moment.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
whether it's in their career, whether it's in their leadership role or their personal life, I think we're all feeling a lot of anxiety. And I think that's pretty honest. What advice would you give them? We all saying take a deep breath, but sometimes it's more than that. Do you have some for them?
One of the overriding themes that emerged from this book as I was writing it was the concept of pausing and listening. So it goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about. It may not be that proverbial deep breath, but you're going to pause. You're going to take a time out. You're going to reflect. The expedition journaled a lot. They wrote notes in their journals and went back and read through them. I teach this leadership development program based on the story of Lewis and Clark, and we do a lot of reflective journaling about what's going on. And sometimes that helps you with your discernment to put it in writing. Write down the pros, the cons, what happened, what's going to happen, what you think is going to happen. And having that in writing in front of you sometimes helps the brain engage with different ideas. And we find it as a very powerful leadership tool to keep a journal about what's going on. So my advice would be to pause, listen, reflect, gather information, and then proceed on.
What was the most surprising thing that both you and your wife discovered from this whole experience, from the Lewis and Clark expedition?
I think one of the things that surprised us both was how relevant it is today. 200 years later, you can learn a lot by studying leaders of the past, whether it's Lewis and Clark or other leaders of the past. But those lessons are still out there and they're still applicable, even though the technology has changed based on what they did. Even when we took our trips, the technology today is 1,000 times different than it was when we took these trips. You can still learn lessons by studying that past.
We always think things change from our past, but there's always lessons to be learned from our past to our future. I have to tell you, Jeff Tunn, author of Uncharted Moments, this has been a great conversation. And I think it's wonderful that you took this journey with your wife, that you wrote this book, that you're sharing with others, and that you're teaching others through the courses that you're doing. Where can our listeners get this amazing book?
Well, it is available on Amazon, or if you want to support indie bookstores, you can get it on bookshop.org as well. And my website, you can find information there about the book, www.jeffreystun.com.
Thank you, Jeff. It's always good to see you and spend time with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peggy. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Okay, listeners, that is all the time we have for the show today. Make sure to share and subscribe to our episodes each week. Share your thoughts with me on X at Connected World, or follow me on LinkedIn, and get this book and subscribe to YouTube and continue the conversation there. Please check out our website at connectedworld.com, our show website at thepeggysmedleyshow.com. Remember, we broadcast live every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central, and we put up our podcast every Thursday. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, your voice for our connected world. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility.